This is Outside Source on BBC News for viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Kasia Madeira and we're covering all the latest developments and analysis here in Britain and also globally. Everything is ready for the first commercial flight taking astronauts to the International Space Station.
I'm Jane O'Brien at the Kennedy Space Centre, where the weather remains the deciding factor. But as of now, NASA says this launch is a go.
In other news, Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson comes under intense pressure from MPs over his refusal to sack his top advisor, but he hits back during 90 minutes of questioning.
I have no reason to depart from what I've already said.
As protests rumble on in Hong Kong, the US Secretary of State says the territory no longer merits special status under American law because China is stripping it of its autonomy. Hello and a warm welcome. In 30 minutes roughly we will reach a new milestone in space travel because for the first time a commercial spacecraft will take humans into orbit. Of course, we'll bring you that launch live here on BBC Outside Source. It's all weather permitting, of course, but let's go right now live to the Kennedy Space Centre. This is the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule and it is on top of a huge rocket, a Falcon 9, which has also been made by SpaceX. On board are two NASA astronauts who will be launched into orbit where they will join the crew on the International Space Station. Now, they are scheduled to take off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida's Cape Canaveral at 4:33 p.m. local time. So in just over 30 minutes time, let's cross over to speak to Jane O'Brien, who joins us live at Cape Canaveral. Jane, so we're still not really 100% sure whether this is going to happen because the weather's just been so terrible there.
Kasia, this is nail-biting stuff. We are now down to the wire. You can see that clock behind me, less than half an hour, about half an hour to go, and we still don't know. Apparently, there will be a sort of a round robin about 10 minutes before the launch where all the various experts will say, OK, is it a go? Is it a go? Is it a go? Go, go. And then there's the weatherman. He is going to be the person who has the final say. If he can't see a window, a safe window in which there's no thunderstorms, no tornado warnings, no heavy rain that could cause flooding, and that flight path is clear so that if something does go wrong, the astronauts can evacuate, eject safely. If he doesn't see that, it's not a go. That's it. All this preparation will have to be delayed and postponed until Saturday. So it is nail-biting, fingers crossed, because this is a historic launch and we still don't know whether it's going to happen.
We always think that the weathermen are the most important people, of course, but when it comes to this, it's so nail-biting, and they need a clear flight path up and right over Ireland, don't they? That's possibly the last time that they could potentially evacuate, eject if things go wrong.
That's right, and we have now been told that in the last few minutes their escape capsule, their escape systems have now been armed. They've also closed their visors, ready for flight. So as far as those two astronauts on board that tiny capsule are concerned, it's going ahead. But as I said, we won't know for another 20 minutes whether or not that's actually going to happen.
My goodness, another 20 minutes, bearing in mind that it's due to launch in 30 minutes. That's really cutting it fine. Jane, will be back with you. That's a promise. Jane O'Brien there live in Cape Canaveral. And like I say, we are monitoring the feed from Cape Canaveral. We will, of course, bring you any details, any updates as we get it on that historic launch. Now, in other news, Boris Johnson has been questioned by senior MPs over his government's handling of the coronavirus outbreak. This is the first time since Mr. Johnson became leader in July last year that he's appeared before the Commons Liaison Committee. Now, it comes amid a growing revolt within his own party over the behaviour of his top advisor, Dominic Cummings. Mr. Cummings drove from London to the northeast of England during the lockdown in order to isolate with his family. Now, this is seemingly in breach of the rules, and yet despite the huge outcry, he has refused to resign and the Prime Minister is refusing to sack him. Well, here's what Mr. Johnson told the committee this afternoon.
I do understand why people feel such indignation about the whole business and the pain of the whole business of the lockdown. But I really also think that what they want now is for us to focus on them and their needs rather than on a political ding-dong about what one advisor may or may not have done.
Well, when it comes to political ding-dongs, this was a heated exchange with the Labour MP, Yvette Cooper.
Other than that, I don't really know what I can add.
No, here's the problem, Prime Minister. The reason you are ducking this is because the reason you're not giving people a straight answer is because you are trying to protect Dominic Cummings. The reason you've sent all of your ministers out to say fudgy things and unclear things is because you are trying not to incriminate Dominic Cummings and you don't want to apologise for him. The problem is that means you are putting your political concerns ahead of clear public health messages to parents who have coronavirus. 40,000 people are dead. We need you to get this right now. So can you tell us, you have a choice between protecting Dominic Cummings and putting the national interest first. Which will it be, Prime Minister?
Well, I think my choice is the choice that the British people will want us all to make, Yvette, and that is, as far as we possibly can, to lay aside party political point scoring and to put the national interest first, and to be very clear with the British public about what we want to do and how we want to take this country forward.
Well, this saga has made headlines around the world. Just have a look at the New York Times, which writes, outcry over Dominic Cummings turns public against Boris Johnson for the first time. And the article goes on to say that for more than 2 months, Prime Minister Johnson has floundered in his response to coronavirus, abandoning widespread testing, dragging his feet on imposing a lockdown, leaving nursing homes unprotected and muddling his message about how to reopen the British economy. But it adds that it took a rogue 260-mile car trip by Mr Johnson's closest advisor to turn the tide of public opinion against him. And that's not the only paper. Spain's El País newspaper has the headline, Brexit ideologists sparked Johnson's worst political crisis. And the article goes on to say that if Johnson initially thought that he could settle the scandal with a firm response, well, he was completely wrong. And the Irish Times asks, when did Mr Johnson become so dependent on Cummings? Was he always this weak? Well, here's our political correspondent, Rob Watson, on whether the Prime Minister has done enough to move past this matter.
I guess the short answer is it depends what your point of view is, Kasia. So for those who support the Prime Minister and who really do want to move on to talk about easing the lockdown, no doubt it would have been music to their ears. But I think for those in his own party and of course beyond in the country, you just think he doesn't get it. The Prime Minister doesn't get it that we're very angry that you can't have one rule for people who work in Downing Street and another rule for people who live and work in every other street in the country. I suspect it will have done very little to assuage not just that anger, by the way, Kasia, but of course there's vast amounts of sort of mockery and joking at the government's expense, which is always a difficult thing.
Yes, there's been a lot of memes, a lot of fun taken out, especially out of that the castle, Barnard Castle, which is at the centre of this controversy there, Rob.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, as you were suggesting in some of those headlines that you read, it's not just here. I mean, of necessity, I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean, any country's politicians are rather parochial, as indeed are its political journalists. So I think a lot of people in the UK aren't aware of how the country's standing internationally has been an absolute free fall. I talked to diplomats, business contacts from across the world, and the sort of narrative, whether you think it's fair or not, that narrative, I was to sum it up crudely as a perception that, you know, the same people that led the UK to Brexit have led it to the highest death toll from the virus in Europe. And again, whether that's fair or not, I mean, it has all sorts of implications for the UK's economy and its clout and standing in the world.
Well, Rob, you mentioned Brexit, so stay with us because we want to discuss this a little bit further. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has written a letter to opposition parties saying that the EU still is open to 1 or 2 year extension to the transition period. But of course, the UK is clear that it simply just does not want an extension. So, Rob, what bearing does this have on the future relationship with the UK and the EU?
Do you know, I think it's really interesting, and of course we've all sort of slightly forgot Brexit a little bit these last few months, but I think this is a reminder, this message has come from the UK's chief negotiator David Frost that the UK is envisaging a much more distant relationship with the EU than I think anybody really imagined based on what happened during the EU referendum. And I think that has all sorts of consequences. I mean, I guess it means either the European Union is going to have to blink in some way and give the UK some concessions, because at the moment the EU's view is, well, sure, if sovereignty is your big issue, you want a more distant relationship, yeah, but obviously you can't expect the same kind of economic benefits. Now, whether the EU is going to blink or whether the UK is going to blink, who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think the really interesting thing is that I think it's taken people by surprise here and around the world just how the UK, the current government, is envisaging that more distant relationship with the European Union, where sovereignty is absolutely prioritised.
Well, thanks to Rob Watson there. Stay with us here on Outside Source, because still to come, we are watching the NASA feed from the Kennedy Space Center like hawks. And we still don't actually know for sure whether this first commercial flight taking astronauts to the International Space Station will launch as planned in about 20 minutes' time. But as soon as we know, you will too.